The Arizona sun was merciless that afternoon, beating down on the asphalt like a hammer on an anvil. I'd just finished a brutal 12-hour shift at Desert Valley Hospital, and all I wanted was to get home, kick off my shoes, and collapse into bed. My scrubs were stained with coffee, and who knows what else. My feet ached, and my mind was foggy with exhaustion. But then I saw them. At first, I thought my tired eyes were playing tricks on me. Two figures sitting on what looked like an old suitcase on the side of Highway 60, miles from anywhere. The heat created wavy mirages on the road ahead, but these figures were real. As I got closer, my heart sank. They were elderly, a man and a woman, both looking lost and broken under the blazing sun. I pulled over immediately, my nurse instincts overriding my exhaustion. Something was terribly wrong. People don't just sit on the side of a desert highway in 100-degree heat, unless something catastrophic has happened. My name is Sarah Mitchell. I'm 38 years old, and I've been a registered nurse for 15 years. In that time, I've seen humanity at its best and its worst. I've held the hands of dying patients, celebrated with families welcoming new life, and witnessed the cruelty that people can inflict on each other. But nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared me for what I was about to discover on that scorching afternoon. As I approached the couple, I could see they were in their 70s, maybe early 80s. The woman had silver hair, pulled back in a neat bun, that was now disheveled, and tears streaked down her sunburned cheeks. The man sat rigidly beside her, his jaw clenched, trying to maintain some dignity, even as his hands trembled. They looked dehydrated, disoriented, and utterly defeated. I grabbed the water bottles from my car and rushed over. "Are you okay? What happened? Do you need me to call someone?" The woman looked up at me with eyes so full of pain and betrayal that I actually took a step back. "They left us," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Our own children left us here." I felt my blood run cold despite the heat. "What do you mean they left you? Where did they go?" The man finally spoke, his voice rough and measured, like each word cost him something. "My name is Robert Harrison. This is my wife, Margaret. Our son David and daughter Jessica drove us out here about an hour ago. They said we were going on a special drive to see the desert. Then they stopped the car right here, told us to get out, and drove away." My mouth fell open. This couldn't be real. They just abandoned you? In the middle of nowhere? In this heat? Margaret sobbed harder. David said, "Let's see if you can survive without us. You're nothing but a burden." And then Jessica laughed. She actually laughed and said we'd been draining their resources for too long. They took our phones, our wallets, everything except the suitcase with a few of our clothes. I felt rage building in my chest, the kind of anger that made my hands shake. In all my years as a nurse, dealing with elder abuse cases in the hospital, I'd never encountered something this blatant, this cruel. This wasn't neglect. This was attempted murder. "Get in my car right now," I said firmly. "We're getting you out of this heat, and then we're calling the police." Robert shook his head slowly. "No police. Not yet. Please. There's more to this story than you know, and if we call the police now, everything will fall apart before I can protect what matters." I looked at him, confused. "Sir, your children abandoned you on a highway. That's a crime. They need to be held accountable." "They will be," Robert said. And for just a moment, I saw something flash in his eyes. Something sharp and calculating that didn't match the image of a helpless elderly man. "But not yet. Please, just help us get somewhere safe. I'll explain everything, I promise. But we need time." Something in his tone made me pause. This wasn't a confused old man. This was someone with a plan. Against my better judgment, I nodded. "Okay, but you're both coming with me, and you're going to tell me everything." I helped them into my car, making sure they were drinking water slowly so they wouldn't get sick. Margaret couldn't stop crying, and I noticed how Robert kept patting her hand, whispering reassurances, even though his own face was tight with barely contained fury. As I drove toward my house, Robert began to talk, and what he told me changed everything I thought I knew about this situation. "Sarah, may I call you Sarah?" he began. I nodded. "Sarah, my children think we're poor. They think we're a burden living off a modest Social Security check and some small savings. For the past year, they've been pressuring us to sign over power of attorney, to let them manage our finances. When we refused, things got ugly." "How ugly?" I asked, glancing at them in the rearview mirror. Margaret's voice was bitter. They started visiting less, making excuses. Then, about 6 months ago, David convinced us to add him to one of our bank accounts, just for emergencies, he said. Within weeks, we noticed money disappearing. Small amounts at first, then larger chunks. When we confronted him, he said we were confused, that we were getting senile and didn't remember our own spending. Robert continued. They gaslit us, made us question our own sanity. Jessica started talking about putting us in a nursing home, the cheapest one she could find. Said it was for our own good, but we knew the truth. They wanted control. They wanted whatever they thought we had. I pulled into my driveway, my mind racing. So what's the part I don't know? You said there's more to the story. Robert looked at me directly, and I saw that calculating expression again. My children think I retired as a simple petroleum engineer with a basic pension. What they don't know is that 35 years ago, I made some very smart investments. Properties in areas that later became valuable. Stock purchases in companies that exploded. I lived modestly on purpose, never flashing wealth, never bragging. I wanted my children to value hard work, not inheritance. How much are we talking about? I asked quietly. My net worth is approximately $1.2 million, Robert said flatly. None of it is in accounts my children know about. I have a lawyer, a financial advisor, and documents secured in multiple locations. I've been waiting to see what kind of people my children would become. And today, they showed me exactly who they are. I sat in stunned silence. The couple my heart had broken for, the helpless elderly people I'd rescued from the roadside, weren't helpless at all. Robert Harrison was sharp, strategic, and had been playing a long game while his children revealed their true nature. Why didn't you tell them about the money? I asked. Margaret answered, her tears finally slowing. Because we wanted to believe they loved us for who we are, not what we have. We wanted to think we'd raised good people. But they failed the test, Sarah. They failed so completely that they were willing to leave us to die in the desert. Robert's voice was ice cold. They think we're gone now. They probably assume we'll die out there, and they'll inherit whatever small amount they think we have. They have no idea what's coming for them. I helped them into my house, setting them up in my guest room with water, food, and cool compresses for their sunburned skin. As I watched Margaret finally relax a little, sleeping fitfully on clean sheets, I made a decision. I was going to help these people get justice. Not just report their children to the police, but help them execute whatever plan Robert had been formulating. That night, after Margaret was asleep and Robert and I sat at my kitchen table, he laid it all out for me. He had a lawyer named Thomas Whitaker, who'd been his friend for 40 years. He had documents, recordings, and a paper trail that would bury his children legally, but he needed time to set everything in motion properly. I need 3 days, Robert said. 3 days where David and Jessica think we're gone, maybe even dead. 3 days for them to show their true colors even more, to start spending money they think they've inherited, to celebrate our absence. And then we strike with everything we have. I should have called the police immediately. I should have followed protocol. But something about Robert's plan, about the idea of these cruel children facing real consequences, made me agree. 3 days, I said. But you're staying here where I can monitor your health. And if either of you shows any signs of serious distress from today's ordeal, we're going to the hospital. Plan or no plan. Robert extended his hand. Deal. And Sarah, when this is over, you'll understand why I needed your help. Why finding you on that road wasn't just luck. It was the universe giving us one good person to balance out the evil of 2 others. Over the next 3 days, I watched Robert and Margaret slowly recover physically, while Robert made quiet phone calls to his lawyer and financial advisor. I learned their full story, how they'd worked hard their entire lives, how Robert had been brilliant with money but humble about it, how they'd put both children through college, helped with down payments on houses, been present grandparents to David's 2 kids who they barely got to see anymore, and I learned what David and Jessica were doing in those 3 days. Robert's lawyer had a private investigator keeping tabs on them. The investigator reported that on the very evening they abandoned their parents, David and Jessica went out for an expensive dinner, celebrating. They actually toasted to their freedom from their burden. Jessica was already looking at luxury vacation packages. David had been to the bank, trying to access accounts he thought would now be his. They were spending money they didn't have yet, money they assumed would come from their parents' deaths. And they showed no remorse, no concern, No attempt to check if their parents were even alive. On the morning of the fourth day, Robert made the call. "Thomas, it's time. File everything." What happened next was a masterclass in legal warfare. Thomas Whitaker didn't just file a police report for elder abuse and abandonment. He filed a civil lawsuit. He contacted the district attorney with evidence of financial exploitation. He sent notification to both David and Jessica that they were being completely removed from any inheritance, with detailed documentation of why. But the real stroke of genius was what Robert did with his will. He divided his estate into 3 parts. 1/3 would go to various charities supporting elder abuse victims. 1/3 would go into a trust for his grandchildren, accessible only when they turned 25, and only if they maintained a relationship with an appointed guardian who would tell them the truth about what their parents did. And the final 1/3 would go to me. When Robert told me this, I immediately protested. "I can't accept that. I just helped you because it was the right thing to do." Robert smiled, the first real smile I'd seen on his face. "Exactly. You helped us because it was right, not because you wanted something. That's why you deserve it. Besides, we're going to need you for the final act, the confrontation." The police came first, of course. When they found Robert and Margaret alive and well at my house, with a full account of what happened, they immediately issued arrest warrants for David and Jessica. But Robert asked them to wait 24 hours before executing the warrants. He wanted them served during a family meeting he was arranging. I'll never forget the looks on David and Jessica's faces when they walked into Thomas Whitaker's law office for what they thought was a routine estate meeting. They'd been told there were documents that needed their signatures. They came dressed in black, playing the part of grieving children, even though they'd made no effort to find their parents or report them missing. And then Robert and Margaret walked in. The color drained from both their faces. Jessica actually stumbled backward. David's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. "Surprised to see us?" Robert asked calmly, taking a seat at the head of the conference table. "I imagine you thought we were dead by now. Left to die in the desert like animals you no longer wanted to care for. Dad, we can explain." David started, his voice shaking. "We were just trying to kill us?" Margaret interrupted, her voice strong now, fortified by anger. "Trying to steal from us? Trying to erase us so you could take what you thought was yours?" Jessica's face twisted with a mixture of fear and defiance. "You were becoming a burden. You couldn't take care of yourselves anymore." "We were doing what was best." "Liar." I couldn't help myself from speaking up. I was sitting in the corner, there as a witness. "Your parents are sharp, capable, and fully competent. You weren't trying to help them. You were trying to exploit them." Thomas Whitaker cleared his throat and began laying out folders on the table. "Mr. David Harrison and Ms. Jessica Harrison, you are here to be formally notified of several legal actions being taken against you." He proceeded to detail everything. The police report for abandonment and elder abuse, the civil lawsuit for financial exploitation and emotional distress, the restraining orders being filed that would prevent them from coming within 500 feet of their parents, and finally, the new will completely disinheriting them. David's face went from pale to red. "You can't do this. We're your children. That money should be ours." "What money?" Robert asked coldly. "You thought I had a few thousand in savings. You were ready to kill us for that?" Thomas smiled thinly. "Actually, let me clarify something for you both. Your father's estate is valued at approximately $1.2 million. Money you never knew about because you never cared enough to really know your father. You saw an elderly man you considered a burden instead of the brilliant investor he actually was." Jessica's eyes went wide. $1.2 million? But you always said— "I never said anything about my finances," Robert corrected. "You assumed, and your assumptions led you to commit crimes that will now cost you everything." At that moment, 2 police officers entered the conference room. "David Harrison and Jessica Harrison, you're under arrest for elder abuse, abandonment of vulnerable adults, and financial exploitation." The screaming started then. Jessica shrieking about unfairness, about how they were just trying to help, about how this was all a misunderstanding. David hurling insults at his father, calling him a manipulative old man who had set them up. But Robert sat calmly through all of it, Margaret holding his hand. And as the police led his children away in handcuffs, he turned to me with tears in his eyes. "Thank you," he said simply. "Thank you for being the one good person we needed at exactly the right moment. The trial happened 6 months later. The evidence was overwhelming. Not just the abandonment on the highway, but months of documented financial abuse, forged signatures, and recordings of conversations where David and Jessica discussed how to handle the old people problem. The district attorney prosecuted aggressively, and the judge showed no mercy. David received 3 years in prison. Jessica got 2 years plus intensive probation. Both were ordered to pay restitution for the money they'd stolen, money they'd already spent and didn't have. Their reputations were destroyed. Their friends abandoned them. Even their own spouses filed for divorce, not wanting to be associated with people capable of such cruelty. But perhaps the most painful consequence for them was learning that they'd destroyed their relationships with their own children for nothing. Robert and Margaret's grandchildren, 10-year-old Emma and 7-year-old Noah, were told age-appropriate versions of what happened. They were heartbroken to learn what their parents had done to their beloved grandparents. Robert and Margaret set up the trust for the kids and made sure they maintained contact through supervised visits and video calls. They wanted the grandchildren to know they were loved, even if their parents had failed every test of human decency. As for me, my life changed in ways I never expected. The media caught wind of the story, and suddenly I was being called a hero for stopping to help strangers on the highway. I didn't feel like a hero. I felt like I'd simply done what anyone should do when they see people in need. But Robert and Margaret insisted I was more than that. "You restored our faith in humanity," Margaret told me over coffee one morning, 3 months after the trial. We'd become close friends, and they'd been staying in an apartment I helped them find near my house. When our own children tried to throw us away, you picked us up and gave us dignity. The money from Robert's estate that came to me changed my life too. I was able to pay off my student loans, buy a house with an extra room specifically designed for Robert and Margaret to stay whenever they wanted, and start a foundation to help other victims of elder abuse. I named it the Second Chance Foundation, because that's what Robert and Margaret got. A second chance to live their final years with respect, safety, and love from people who actually cared about them. A year after that day on the highway, we held a small celebration. Robert was 79, Margaret was 77, and both were thriving. We invited some of the neighbors, some friends from the foundation, and of course Emma and Noah, whose other grandparents had taken custody after David and Jessica's imprisonment. As we sat around my dining table, Robert raised his glass. "I want to make a toast," he said, his voice strong and clear, "to Sarah, who proved that family isn't always about blood. It's about who shows up when you need them most. And to all of us here, who understand that a person's worth isn't measured in dollars, but in dignity, kindness, and love." We all raised our glasses, and I felt tears stinging my eyes. A year ago, I'd been exhausted and just wanted to get home. If I'd driven past that curve a few seconds earlier or later, I might have missed seeing them entirely. If I'd been too tired to stop, too afraid to get involved, this story would have ended very differently. But I did stop, and in doing so, I gained a family I never knew I needed. Emma tugged on my sleeve. "Aunt Sarah," she said. She'd started calling me that months ago. "Grandpa says you saved them. Is that true?" I looked at Robert and Margaret, who were smiling at me with such warmth and affection. "No, sweetheart," I said honestly. "They saved themselves. They were smart enough and strong enough to survive and fight back. I just drove the getaway car." Emma giggled, and the whole table laughed. But Robert caught my eye and mouthed 2 words. "Thank you." Looking back now, I realize that day changed all of us. Robert and Margaret learned that even when your own children betray you, there are still good people in the world. Emma and Noah learned that their grandparents were heroes who stood up for themselves. And I learned that sometimes the most important thing you can do is simply stop when you see someone who needs help. David and Jessica learned too, though their lesson was harsh. They learned that cruelty has consequences, that the people you underestimate might be stronger than you think, that greed destroys everything it touches, and that once you cross certain lines, there's no going back. 3 years later, David was released from prison. Jessica had gotten out 6 months earlier. Neither attempted to contact their parents. Neither apologized. The last I heard, David was working at a warehouse, his engineering degree worthless with a criminal record. Jessica was living with a roommate in a small apartment, her dreams of luxury vacations long dead. Their children, Emma and Noah, thrived under their other grandparents' care and maintained close relationships with Robert and Margaret. On Emma's 18th birthday, she told me she wanted to become a social worker specializing in elder abuse cases. Because of what Grandpa and Grandma went through, she said, I want to help other old people who get treated badly. Robert overheard her, and his eyes filled with tears. That's my girl, he said proudly, taking something terrible and turning it into something good. As for Robert and Margaret, they lived to celebrate their 60th wedding anniversary. The party was held in the community room of the beautiful assisted living facility they'd chosen for themselves when they finally needed extra care. It was a facility they could afford because of Robert's careful financial planning, not one that would drain and exploit them. I was there, of course, with my husband Michael, whom I'd met at a foundation fundraiser 2 years after the highway incident. Emma and Noah were there, both thriving college students now, and dozens of other people whose lives Robert and Margaret had touched with their kindness and resilience. During the party, Robert pulled me aside. He was 87 now, moving slower, but still sharp as a tack. Sarah, do you remember what I told you that first night at your kitchen table? About how finding you wasn't luck? I nodded. You said it was the universe giving you one good person to balance out the evil of 2 others. He smiled. I was wrong about that. Finding you wasn't balance. It was grace. It was proof that even in our darkest moment, when we'd lost faith in our own family, we could still find family in unexpected places. Margaret joined us, linking her arm through mine. You're our daughter, she said simply. Not by blood, but by choice. Our choice, and yours. I hugged them both, careful not to squeeze too hard. And you're my parents by choice, I said. The best parents anyone could ask for. As the party continued around us, I thought about that scorching afternoon on Highway 60, about the choice I'd made to stop, to help, to get involved, about how easily I could have driven past, too tired or too busy to notice 2 elderly people in desperate need, and I thought about David and Jessica, wherever they were, living with the consequences of their choices driven by greed, impatience, and a fundamental lack of empathy that had cost them everything meaningful in their lives. The story could have ended so differently if Robert hadn't been as smart as he was, if he hadn't prepared and planned, if he'd actually been the helpless victim his children assumed he was. They might have gotten away with it. Elderly people are abandoned, exploited, and abused every single day. Many don't have the resources to fight back. Many don't survive. But Robert and Margaret did survive. And more than that, they thrived. They took their betrayal and turned it into a mission to help others, supporting the foundation that now bears their name. The Harrison Foundation for Elder Dignity helps hundreds of seniors every year, providing legal assistance, financial counseling, and safe housing for those escaping abuse. Emma, true to her word, became a social worker and now runs the foundation's outreach program. Noah, who'd followed his grandfather's footsteps into engineering, designs affordable safety technology for elderly people living alone. From one act of cruelty, an entire network of kindness grew. From 2 people thrown away like trash, a legacy of dignity and justice emerged. On the day Robert passed away peacefully in his sleep at age 91, with Margaret and me holding his hands, his last words were, "We won. Love won. Good won." Margaret lived another 3 years, surrounded by people who genuinely cared for her, not for what she had, but for who she was. At her funeral, Emma gave the eulogy and told the story of that day on the highway, the day her grandparents were abandoned but not defeated. My biological parents thought they could erase Grandpa and Grandma, Emma said, her voice clear and strong. They thought disposing of them would solve their problems and bring them wealth. Instead, it revealed who they really were, and it showed the world who their parents really were. Heroes, survivors, and proof that cruelty never wins in the end. I still drive that stretch of Highway 60 sometimes. Every time I pass the spot where I found them, I slow down and say a quiet thank you. Thank you for the reminder to stop. Thank you for the family I gained. Thank you for the lesson that our worst moments can become our greatest testimonies. And I think about all the Robert and Margarets out there, being underestimated, exploited, and discarded by people who should protect them. I think about all the Davids and Jessicas who believe cruelty won't have consequences. This story isn't just about one couple abandoned on a highway. It's about a crisis happening in homes across this country every single day. It's about children who see their parents as burdens instead of blessings. It's about a society that sometimes values youth and productivity over wisdom and experience. But it's also about hope. Hope that there are still good people willing to stop and help. Hope that justice can prevail. Hope that even when your own blood betrays you, you can find family in unexpected places. So if you're watching this and you're young, call your parents or grandparents today. Not to ask for anything, but just to tell them you love them. Make sure they know their value isn't in what they can give you, but in who they are. And if you're older, watching this and wondering if anyone would notice if you disappeared, know this: you matter. Your life has value. Your dignity is worth fighting for. And there are people like me out there, ready to stop and help when you need it most. David and Jessica thought their parents couldn't survive without them. They were wrong. Their parents didn't just survive. They triumphed. They built a legacy of love and justice that will outlast the bitterness and greed that motivated two children to commit one of the cruelest acts imaginable. In the end, Robert's secret wasn't just about money. It was about strength, dignity, and the unbreakable spirit of two people who refused to be erased. And sometimes, the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's simply living well, loving deeply, and proving that your worth was never defined by the people who tried to diminish you. If this story touched you, please subscribe to this channel and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Comment below and tell me where you're watching from. Have you or someone you know experienced elder abuse? How did you fight back? Your story matters, and sharing it might help someone else find the courage to speak up. Remember, family is not just who you're born to. It's who shows up when you need them most. And sometimes the family you choose is stronger than the family you're given. Thank you for listening to Robert and Margaret's story. Thank you for being the kind of person who stops to help. And thank you for remembering that every elderly person you see was once young, vital, and full of dreams, just like you are now. Treat them with the respect and dignity they deserve, because one day you'll be in their shoes too. And when that day comes, I hope someone like me stops to help you.